watch your stupid video. Just tell me what are the best tier 4 upgrades for the Asgardians. Okay. Number 1, Heimdall passive. Number 2, Loki ultimate. Number 3, Loki special. Number 4, Hela ultimate. And number 5, Hela passive. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Orange Essentials. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Asgardians. Now, the Asgardians are one of the most formidable teams in the game, and I believe they are one of the top 5 teams in the entire game, at least as of the date of this recording. And I also believe that they are, hands down, the number 1 Alliance War defense. They are absolutely terrifying. Not only do they get a bunch of additional perks for war defense, but they're really good at giving you the runaround. You've got Sif with a really low cooldown taunt. Loki keeps throwing anyone who goes low into stealth. The Undead Asgardian keeps rewinding people's turn meter and healing people, and they all heal for so much on each and every turn that they take. So yeah, again, on Alliance War defense, they are an absolute nightmare to face. So without further ado, let's break down their T4s. First, we'll take a look at Thor. So taking a look at Thor's basic, when you put tier 4s in this ability, it adds 40% damage. Now, it is true that especially on a full Asgardian team, Thor has a particularly high damage stat. However, it's still just a 40% increase, which is pretty standard, so for me, this is a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Thor's special. So when you put tier 4s in Thor's special, it adds 40% damage to the primary target, and it goes from chaining to between 2 and 3 targets to always hitting a 3rd target, and in addition, it's going to increase the damage that the chain targets take by 30%. So, for me, this is a bit of an interesting one because as far as chain ability upgrades go, it's pretty standard. However, it's on such a low cooldown that it makes sense that you'd be using this ability a lot. So, because you're going to be using it so frequently, for me, it just barely squeaks by as a 3-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Thor's ultimate. So when you put tier 4s in Thor's ultimate, it adds 50% damage to all targets, and it goes from a 40% chance to apply stun to the additional targets to a 50% chance. So a lot of people have suggested to me that they think this should be essential, and I'm not quite sold on that. 50% damage isn't bad, but it's actually pretty standard for an AoE, and yes, again, Thor has high base damage, but it's not an outrageous amount of extra damage. And in addition, the stun chance is only a 10% improvement, so against 10 enemies, it should amount to maybe 1 additional target stunned. Now, of course, because it's based on essentially a coin flip, it could result in a bunch of extra targets getting stunned, but in my opinion, while it is a strong upgrade and certainly not a waste of your T4s, I don't quite view this one as absolutely necessary. So for me, this is a 3-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Thor's passive. So when you put tier 4s in Thor's passive, he gains an additional 5% damage, and in addition, when he gets a maximum stack of charges, instead of hitting everyone for 240% damage, he'll hit for 260% damage. So this is just not that impressive. The extra 5% damage is nice, but it's really the equivalent of like having 2 red stars on a character instead of 0, except just for damage, so it's not that much more damage. And then the AoE doing an extra 20%, you're barely gonna feel, so yeah, for me this is just a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Loki. So, taking a look at Loki's basic, if you put tier 4s in Loki's basic, it's gonna add 30% more damage to the primary target, and his chance to gain evade is gonna go from 40% to 50%. So, there are a lot of basics that scale like this. Loki's damage is not particularly impressive, so an extra 30% damage is pretty alright. And the extra 10% chance to gain evade, again, it's not terrible if he does get an evade that he otherwise wouldn't have gotten. That can be a big deal, but ultimately the 10% extra just means that for every 10 basic attacks, you'll get 1 more evade than you would have gotten. So because it's not particularly revolutionary, for me, this is just a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Loki's special. So when you put tier 4s in Loki's special, it goes from always mind controlling 1 with a 75% chance to mind control a second to always mind controlling 2 targets. Now, abilities like this I don't normally like to rank very high if without the upgrade it's going to do the exact same thing 3 out of 4 times. However, in Loki's case it's a little bit different. Firstly, the target is going to have defense down, so you're getting really good value on that extra assist damage, and you never want to miss out on it. And then more importantly, this is going to happen before Hela takes her turn. So if you have tier 4s in Hela's ult, which we'll talk about later in the video, she's going to spread whatever debuffs are on the target. And depending on who you call to assist, there are a lot of characters in the game right now that have some sort of debuff on their basic. So if you get a character with a really useful debuff on their basic to jump in as that second assist, like an offense down or a slow, something like that, and then you're able to spread that to the entire team with Hela, it can completely change how the opponent's first turn is going to go. So because this has so much potential to be a game changer, it is definitely not something you want to ever have only called the single assist for. So for me, this is a 4-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Loki's ultimate. So when you put tier 4s in Loki's ultimate, it changes the stealth duration that he gives to the entire team minus his summoned minions from 1 turn of stealth to 2 turns of stealth. And this is actually a really big deal for the Asgardian team in particular, because now people are going to remain in stealth for the full duration that it's going to take for Sif to get her taunt back up. So it's now a perfect stopgap where the team would be vulnerable, and it's going to force people to have to attack the Loki summons. And so he can summon 3 minions. He's always going to summon at least 2. So at a minimum, you're going to be wasting 4 enemy attacks unless they're hitting with something that's going to ignore the evade or an AoE or something like that. So because you get really good value out of this, and then anyone who drops below 50% will get thrown back into stealth as passive anyway, for me, this is an easy 4-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Loki's passive. So when you put tier 4s in Loki's passive, instead of reducing enemy resistance by 20%, it's going to reduce enemy resistance by 30%. So it's certainly not a terrible upgrade, but in my experience, in a lot of instances, this ends up not making that big of a difference. Just reducing enemy resistance by 20% is already usually enough for just about any debuff to land. The main people trying to land debuffs on the enemies anyway are Thor with his ultimate, Hela with her ultimate and special, and Loki with his special. And again, most of those abilities, they have no trouble landing. In particular because as soon as Loki lands his first special, which he usually has no trouble doing, Hela is able to spread defense down to the entire enemy team, and when everyone has defense down, their resistance is already cut in half anyway. So while I don't think this is a terrible upgrade, because it is almost never actually the difference in a war match, for me it's just a 2-star. That said, if you're using Loki for like Ultimus 7 or something where you're really punching up on much stronger enemies, then this would definitely rate higher. Alright, now we'll take a look at Hela. So taking a look at Hela's basic, when you put tier 4s in this ability, it's going to add 60% more damage to the primary target, and then another 10% piercing, which could hit the same target or could hit a different one. But so this is a pretty standard basic. It's a pretty high number though. Ultimately, you're adding 70% damage to this ability, and that is a well above average basic upgrade. So for me, that's a 3-star. All right, now we're going to take a look at Hela's special. So putting tier 4s on Hela's special does a couple things. It's going to add 60% more damage, and instead of applying Disrupted for 1 turn, it's going to apply Disrupted for 2 turns. So on War Defense, this ends up not being that big of a deal. That said, an extra turn of Disrupted is always good. It prevents people from being put into stealth or given regen or various other things. But generally speaking, on War Defense, this doesn't end up making that big of a deal. However, for any game modes where you're playing Hela, you now have the option, if you want to open up with the special, when you go to ult the following turn, you can spread Disrupted to the entire enemy team because it will still be on your original target, unless there was a cleanse or something like that. So for that functionality, for me, this is a strong 3-star. Alright, now we're taking a look at Hela's ultimate. So when you put tier 4s in Hela's ultimate, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to add 50% more damage to all targets, but more importantly, it's going to change how many debuffs she'll spread from 2 to 4. Now this is a pretty big deal because Loki goes before her, so depending on which targets Loki mind controls, you can get really good debuffs, and then having Hela be able to spread all of them is excellent. You're already going to have a multi-turn defense down from the Loki special, but if you, for example, get mind controls that apply an offense down and a slow, being able to spread all of that to the entire enemy team can be an absolute game changer. It's also a really important ability when you're playing as Hela, because it opens up so much combo potential with characters that do a lot of debuffs. Characters like Venom, Carnage, Scientist Supreme, all sorts of stuff like that. Immediately, you can just absolutely cover the enemy team in debuffs. So for the added functionality alone, this is easily a 4-star. All right, now we'll take a look at Hela's passive. So Hela's passive comes with a boatload of upgrades. Firstly, she's going to get an additional 5% max health, and then an additional 5% max health per Asgardian ally. So right off the bat, she's getting 25% more max health, which is already an amazing upgrade considering the type of sustain that this team has. Then, she's also going to gain 5% damage for herself and an additional 5% damage for the entire Asgardian team, which is really good. And then on top of both of those things, this one upgrade will upgrade all of her Undead Asgardian summons abilities. And I'll just very briefly go over the upgrades that her Undead Asgardian will be getting. His basic will gain 50% piercing damage, nothing wrong with that. His special will gain 60% piercing damage, and it will improve the damage of both of the bleeds that he'll apply. And his passive, he will heal, instead of for 140% of his max health, he'll heal for 180% of his max health. And you're getting all that just by upgrading this ability that already gives Hela a ton more health and a little bit more damage for the entire team. So for so many reasons, this is an easy 4-star. All right, now we'll take a look at Heimdall. So putting tier 4s in Heimdall's basic is going to add 50% damage to the primary target. So again, in the past, I've rated 50% improvements as a 3-star just by being slightly above average, but the more new characters that come out, we're pretty much to the point now where a 50% damage improvement on the basic is still pretty standard, again, considering who these characters are competing against as of the current meta. And so between that and the fact that Heimdall doesn't have an insanely impressive damage stat, for me, this is just a 2-star. All right, now we'll take a look at Heimdall's special. So putting tier 4s in Heimdall's special is going to do a couple things. It's going to do an extra 50% damage to all targets, and it's going to go from a 75% chance to remove heal block on the Asgardians to a 100% chance. So this one I was kind of on the fence about. It's certainly not that critical. 50% damage on an AoE is slightly above average, which is certainly not bad. And the fact that 3 out of 4 times it was already going to remove heal block means it's not quite that important. However, in particular, heal block above all else, I think heal block is really the single biggest way to contain the Asgardian team when you're facing them. So because you always want to remove heal block if there ever is any heal block, even though it's not that common, for me this squeaks by as a 3-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Heimdall's ultimate. So when you put tier 4s in his ultimate, it's going to add 50% more damage to the primary and the adjacent targets. So there's really not much to say about this one. A 50% damage improvement on a splash damage attack is pretty standard these days, and Heimdall's damage certainly isn't absolutely game-changing, so for me this is just a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Heimdall's passive. So when you put tier 4s in Heimdall's passive, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to improve all the Asgardians' focus by 10%, which is certainly nice. However, more importantly, on war defense, on spawn, instead of 3 random Asgardians getting 2-turn defense up, now all Asgardians will get that 2-turn defense up. And that's really critical, because these guys do not have another way to gain defense up. So this essentially protects them for the first 2 turns very effectively. And again, there's no other way for them to gain this 2-turn defense up. So you definitely don't want a vital character like Hela or Thor not getting that defense up on spawn, whereby they would be vulnerable and potentially burst it out, which will completely dismantle their defense. So because this is so essential for them to be really tough to kill before someone gets thrown into stealth really early in the fight, for me, this is an easy 4-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Sif. So you put tier 4s in Sif's basic, it adds 40% damage to the primary target, and that's it. That is a very standard basic upgrade, so for me, that's a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Sif's special. So when you put tier 4s in Sif's special, it just adds 50% more damage to the primary target. Again, Sif is not on this team because she's dealing some tremendous amount of damage, so just an extra 50% to a single target, it's not that much, it's not particularly relevant, so for me, this is a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Sif's ultimate. So this one's a little bit tricky. When you put tier 4s in this one, it's going to add 40% more damage to the primary target, 40% damage to everyone that gets hit by the chain, and it's always going to chain to 1 additional target. So objectively, in terms of how much more damage is being put out, it's certainly not a bad upgrade. However, again, it's coming from Sif, who's not hitting that hard, so the extra 300 or so % damage from Sif on 1 random target a lot of times is not going to amount to a kill that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten. So even though, again, the value is not bad, I can't see a lot of instances where this would be a make or break ability. So for me, this is just a 3-star. All right, now we'll take a look at Sif's passive. So when you put tier 4 abilities in Sif's passive, it's going to be 10% more block chance and 5% more block amount. So it's certainly not bad. However, in my experience, it's pretty unnecessary. She's already going to have about 75% block chance, so going up to 85% block chance isn't bad, but again, she's going to block most things anyway, and that's when she doesn't have deflect, and she's going to be gaining a lot of deflect, so there's not even a big window where she'll have the opportunity to actually roll to see if she's going to block, because again, she'll usually have deflect and block anyway. As for the block amount, reducing damage by another 5% is rarely going to be a big deal. I mean, when the Asgardian team is losing a match, it's not because Sif wasn't blocking enough and died too early on. In my experience, Sif is incredibly, incredibly durable, and so while this does make her slightly more survivable, that's never really their issue, so for me, this is just a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Captain America. So if you're wondering why Captain America is on this graphic, there's actually a very good reason. A few, in fact. So the first thing is that the Asgardians are a very safe team, despite not having a way to generate defense up for themselves beyond the first 2 turns thanks to the Heimdall passive. However, Captain America has a very low cooldown taunt, so he will be able to constantly be refreshing defense ups for that team, making them incredibly safe, and he's also an amazing stand-in for Sif. More importantly though, he also gives ability energy to Avengers, and Thor is the only Avenger on the Asgardian team, so Captain America alone can give Thor anywhere between 2 and 5 ability energy, which can make a massive difference and allow Thor to ult far more frequently. So because there's the potential to get a lot more value out of Thor, and the fact that he's bringing defense ups to an already very safe team, I think Captain America is the #1 substitute on this team. Alright, let's take a look at Captain America's basic. So we put tier 4s in this ability, it's going to do a couple things. It'll give him 20% more damage to the primary target, and it's going to go from a 50% chance to gain defense up to a 100% chance to gain defense up. So I do really like this upgrade. The 20% damage is pretty much inconsequential. However, the guaranteed defense up does make Cap much safer, and it allows him to be very effective with his cooldowns down. However, in my experience, especially as part of the Asgardian team, the fight is already going to be decided by the time Cap is getting his 3rd turn, which is when he would first basic anyway. So even though I think this is an excellent upgrade, because it's going to almost never be relevant to the outcome of an Asgardian match, for me, it's a 3-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Captain America's special. Now when you put tier 4s in this ability, it's going to go from giving ability energy from 1 to 2 random allies, up to giving ability energy to 1 to 3 random allies. So while I do like any ability that can give out extra ability energy, however, this one, it's just not going to happen that often. Captain America is only going to be able to do this every 3 turns. Who the energy is going to go to is random, so it might go to someone that's not going to make use of the energy. And most of the time, it's going to give out ability energy to a number of targets that it could have done without this upgrade. So you can make the case for this being a little bit higher, but again, there are going to be tons of instances where this ends up having no impact on the fight, especially as part of the Asgardian team. So for me, this is just a 2-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Captain America's ultimate. So when you put tier 4s in this ability, it's going to add 20% more damage to the primary target, as well as the additional targets. And that's it. So Captain America would not be on this team for his fantastic damage, because he doesn't have fantastic damage, and then this is only improving the damage 20%, so yeah, this would just be a waste of T4s. This is a 1-star. Alright, now we'll take a look at Captain America's passive. So when you put tier 4s in Captain America's passive, it's going to improve his block amount by 5%. So that's a pretty standard upgrade. To Cap's credit, he does a lot of blocking, so you might get a decent amount of value out of this, but because it's just a 5%, it's a completely standard upgrade, so for me, this is a 2-star. Alright, so there you have it. Those are my picks for the top tier 4 ability upgrades for the Asgardians. I want to give a shout out to Vet for doing a terrific job editing these Orange Essentials as always. And of course, we are doing a Power Core giveaway on this video. So for this video, if you'd like to be entered in for a chance to win $10 worth of Power Cores, In the comments below, simply let me know if you could add any one Asgardian character to the Asgardian team, who would you add? And if you let me know that in the comments, you'll be entered in for a chance to win $10 worth of power cores via Google Play or iTunes codes. Otherwise, that's all for now. I will have another episode of Orange Essentials coming out for you guys tomorrow, so stay tuned. Until then, peace!